Guys.
Yeah.
I thought we agreed that we were dressing up for the theme. Is it not? You don't?
No.
No?
We're filming.
Oh. Hello.
Hello.
And welcome to the Playback special video for the Met Gala 2019.
Credits roll.
Yeah.
Alright, fix your hair again, Tom.
It's really hot. Not comfortable to wear at all. Alright. So, hey guys.
Hey.
Hello.
How's it going?
You know, it's going great. I have been drowning in photos of celebrities wearing clothes for the last 24 hours.
There were a lot of celebrities wearing clothes, and also a lot of maybe not celebrities wearing clothes.
And a lot of celebrities barely wearing clothes.
Very true. Well, I guess for those of you not in the know, we're talking about the 2019 Met Gala, which took place last night, May 6th. The theme was... What was the theme?
It was articulated as camp notes on fashion.
Camp
Yes.
Notes on Fashion, which I guess is a nod to Susan Sontag's Notes on Camp from 1964, although you wouldn't have guessed it if you were just trying to gather what the theme was from the costumes alone.
Well, it's the only thing about camp that straight people have ever read, I think, so that checks out.
Yeah, and just like some of them.
Yes, only some of them.
But
It's unclear that their stylists even had read Notes on Camp.
well, if they had, they probably would have been a little bit more self-reflexive. But why do you think that camp is such a challenging theme for something like this? Why do you think so many people kind of like did a half okay job?
Well, I think one of the things about camp is that it doesn't know it's camp until it becomes camp in retrospect. So intentionally trying to be camp is a really difficult task to ask of anyone.
Yeah, there are some objects that like people list in sort of Sontag's essay, and then in the immediate kind of aftermath in which people were debating Sontag's essay, which was a big public sort of thing. Were a lot of earlier cultural references, and some that were more present and more with them, the pop art movement, Andy Warhol's work, but a lot of them were 30s film icons, 40s film icons, things from a couple decades ago. I think that time is one thing that helps us understand what camp is, because we have a sense of what cultural objects were valued and devalued, where those things are more up in the air and for debate when you're living in that moment.
That's true. Right. And I think Sontag argues that, like, being able to step away from something in time means that we're not as attached to the moral stakes of that thing. I mean, even today, if we're not, like, concerned about societal morals writ large, we are concerned about, like, cancel culture and, what's PC and what's acceptable, which is, I think, obviously, by and large, really great, but it also does make, camping a little bit more difficult in some capacity. So I think you're right that the focus on older kind of past stuff makes camp a little bit easier.
Yeah.
And I think in the moment you're usually consuming the text that then becomes campy in a sincere way. So Dynasty and Dallas are hugely popular texts when they're on, and now they're kind of, trademarks of camp. But in the 80s, that's not how, the popular audience was watching those shows at the time.
Right. In part, they've now become camp objects because they were, one, popular texts that many, many people were consuming, but two, they were bad cultural objects in estimation, right? Cultural critics were looking down upon Dynasty and Dallas because they were these lowbrow cultural forms, because they were soap operas and they were over the top and they jumped the shark so many times or whatever. Probably they weren't using that phrase then, but like that was essentially the gist of their argument for it. But I think the other thing that makes it like a difficult assignment maybe is that celebrity fashion is itself so serious, and as a business, as a part of the culture industries, it is big business and it's important business, and celebrity more generally is important business. And to your point about cancel culture, celebrities really are in a very safe place with their images right now, like really not wanting to rock the boat, really not wanting to do anything that like will make them a firestorm of controversy. And so, in general, red carpetry has kind of been a little safe and a little bland since the heyday of the wild, like, early to mid 2000s, where people were just, like, trying shit on the red carpet and seeing what works, you know?
That's true. And I think part of the issue is also just because Met Gala looks are always being mediated through the designers. Mm-hmm. So, not that I think she would have done a particularly good job, but I don't think that we can blame Hailey Baldwin, now Bieber, for her kind of like failure to really live up to the challenge, just because I don't think she was responsible for like her look. She might have had the choice of like some designers maybe, or like maybe she didn't, and then like she got what she got, and I think she made it work. But I think that it's interesting which stars we think maybe have more control over their star text, and like which ones are kind of more concerned with the fashion name or the stylist rather than, you know, living up to the theme.
I think who has more control over their star text, but also those who maybe aren't quite as guided by stylists or a particular creative partnership at the time. Several stars came with the designers that they're so known for being in some sort of sponsorship deal with, and that was like their date to the Met Gala. Or La Roche went with Zendaya, you know? So I think those kind of really strong business partnerships are also a huge part of it. Versus someone like Lady Gaga, who's maybe going to be seen more as the creative, mastermind rather than Brandon Maxwell in that situation.
Mm-hmm. Even though Brandon Maxwell similarly was right beside her, like helping her with the costume changes, all 25 of them or whatever, that there were only 4, but helping her through all those changes, right? And they were very Brandon Maxwell designs. They were simple, they were elegant, there were just a lot of them, and they were blown up to like massive expanse, and the accessories did a lot of work for that, right?
And I think in that case her performance also
absolutely
did
a 16-minute entrance.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what made it camp. As you said, the styles themselves were actually pretty, simple and clean.
Yeah, and I think also part of camp is really being self-referential and not being afraid to make fun of yourself. Mm-hmm. If you're going to do it, if you're going to try to be camp, right? Obviously, there's most camp is even unintentional, and we can talk about that too, but I think Lady Gaga is very cognizant of her place historically within the fashion industry, but also currently, right? So she's just coming off of her kind of big movie star turn, and how does she get back to like maybe the more unconventional space that we know her to kind of live in most of the time. And I think that this was kind of a way of building down, or like breaking down the layers, I guess, just to build them back up in terms of a different kind of artifice.
Yeah.
I mean, she had hair bows in her hair to go back to like her first era and most kind of iconic look that she entered the scene on. So there was very much a kind of nod to her past pop star persona that she's largely shed for A Star Is Born.
Yeah. And then by contrast, you had I think mostly of the folks who wore Louis Vuitton, but Emma Stone and Alicia Vikander in particular just looked like they look at any other red carpet, because their Louis Vuitton looks were completely ridiculous, as most Louis Vuitton is, but not... but Louis Vuitton, but because they're all looks that you could see them wearing on the red carpet in a serious way and other kind of like promotional opportunities, like Alicia Vikander has worn things at least that crazy at red carpet promotional appearances, it doesn't work as camp. It doesn't read as such. It's just like another thing that she's wearing on the red carpet. Pink carpet, as it were.
So pink.
So pink.
I mean, I think, there are definitely ways of being successful and ways of not being successful. What do you guys think were some of the more successful looks that were shown last night?
Hamish Bowles wrapped himself in a blanket. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was great. My grandmother has that blanket, and she really, loves it, and I loved it on Hamish Bowles on the pink carpet.
So Hamish Bowles was serving Austin's grandmother?
Yes, absolutely.
Austin's grandmother, but make it fashion.
Absolutely.
Is camp.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of wit to the style itself. It was a suit, but the proportions were very cropped, and there were lots of sashes that didn't necessarily go anywhere, that were just to excess. The pilgrim shoes were hysterical. I loved those. His hair was dyed. I don't think he normally does that.
I think it was very like dandy-esque.
Yes.
And I think dandyism is kind of like a precursor to camp in a lot of ways.
It's a
just
good,
like,
yes.
it's
or
a good
like the
Oscar
flaneur.
Wilde reference.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Just like being completely unconcerned with what everyone else is doing, and but also like a specific nod to that kind of style as well.
Yeah.
And a dandyism that doesn't take itself too seriously.
Right.
Because I think that's the line between those two.
Right.
Fashion
I think
movements.
that's what Sontag said is like when Oscar Wilde started embracing irony as opposed to just like being
Or embracing
like,
bad
rich.
objects, as
Right.
we've been talking about.
Yeah.
that's kind of when he started having a camp sensibility.
Yeah.
What about you, Laura?
Well, I've already been mentioning Lady Gaga, and I think in a similar way, Billy Porter was someone who used the moment to make this a performance, which is something that I think really took it over the line to just being, a huge extravagant costume to being camp. Entering in this kind of pharaoh-like way with men carrying him, posing, in his, with his wings and things like that on the red carpet. To me, not only is the outfit fabulous, but the performance that goes along with it is, what tips it over into being camp.
Yeah, and I think also just the references, right? I think part of what makes successful camp, if you're trying, is just like knowing what references to make and what kind of maybe texts are already camp, so that if you can't yourself be it, maybe the references kind of get you there or put you over the top. And so like I don't like Cleopatra. Somebody did a really good tweet about all the different references that the Billy Porter kind of performance did, but that was definitely, I think, in addition to the fact that he was just like covered head to toe in like gold sequins and like enormous wings, right? But even more than that, as if that weren't enough.
But also, I mean, the introduction of like non-white cultural references into a camp context, I think, is really important. Lena Waithe also did that with the custom tux that said, and I don't know that this was necessarily camp. I think this was more serious and intentional, a statement
On the type of people who would be trying camp.
Absolutely,
in this
yes.
venue.
The tux said, Black drag queens invented camp, essentially, on the back of the tux. And then the lines, the pinstripes, what appeared to be pinstripes on the suit were actually embroidered lines from gay anthems by Black
It was
women
Sylvester,
artists.
actually.
Sylvester, Diana Ross was on there. It was a lot of different Black cultural references. But I think that one thing that... So Sontag often sort of gets criticized for evacuating all of the kinds of politics from camp by trying to make it apolitical, right? And thinking about it as a sensibility that she can observe from a position outside of homosexuality, ironically, because she was sort of closeted at the time, means that it has the opportunity to kind of, in being something that you kind of know when you see it, can be really susceptible to only being things that a certain level of cultural critic can recognize, right? And Dyer talks about how the fact that there is like camping as a strategy, but also then camp as a recognition of kind of an object or a sensibility, means that you can have things left out, and particularly like communities of interpretation left out, I think. And so I was glad to see that Billy Porter was bringing in these like other references that were very far away from the like Stepford Wives, Valley of the Dolls kind of thing that Haley Baldwin was doing, which is a fine kind of reference point for camp, I think. But it's not the only one.
If it was intentional.
Sure, if it was intentional.
Yeah, I mean, we should probably point out that even though Susan Sontag maybe brought an academic face to camp, something that had existed for like a very, very long time, other authors had talked about it in, different capacities. Yes. So like Zora Neale Hurston talks about like the Black ironic sensibility, right, as early as the 1930s. So there's definitely, even if it didn't go by the same name, this kind of practice goes on in a lot of different communities, and I think there is a level of not only potentially racism, but also just classism, really, about, or elitism at least, in terms of like, oh, you have to have a certain level of taste already to then go against that taste. So like, wrestling can be camp, but only if you know that wrestling is bad, right?
Yes.
So, but if you think that wrestling's good, then even though you are getting the same kinds of pleasure from it, you're not doing camp. You're not like accessing this level of the elites.
There's a very particular kind of cultural capital being activated in the way that most people think about camp, the way that most people identify camp objects, I think, and certainly the way that the stylists who were involved in the Met Gala, I think, were deploying those references. It was a lot of sameness and uniformity in those reference points. And so when it was executed well, it looked great, but when it was executed just fine, it didn't work.
Yeah, it's like when Anna Wintour comes down referencing the line about like a woman in a dress made of a million feathers, that's great. When like there are so many other feather dresses, you're like, okay, like I guess nobody really like that's the one line that everybody kind of went to.
Yeah. But as I saw a lot of people point out on Twitter too, like I think the campiest thing about Anna Wintour's look was the fact that she wasn't wearing her sunglasses and that she was like smiling.
Right.
Like it was so absurd. Like she was so gleeful about the fact that she had chosen this like theme and was like supposedly letting go of like her serious persona, right? Like I don't know.
And I think the kind of like institutionalized space of Vogue as like, you know, the place that determines fashion, and the Met Gala as the place that determines that then this is art, is why these looks that sort of like nodded to it but didn't really embrace it were not as successful as those that seem to find a lot of joy in camp, or someone like Celine Dion or Joan Collins who like embrace the fact that that is their persona at this point, and just totally lean into it.
Yeah,
I think those are why those worked better than Anna Wintour just wearing a lot of feathers.
Right.